The following is an original audio series from Sierra International Machinery, Pile of Scrap, with your host, John Sacco.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pile of Scrap. I'm here with everybody's favorite economist, especially in the recycling world, Jason Shanker. Jason.
John, thank you. It's great to be here. That is quite the wind-up. I hope I can deliver. So, yeah, here we are.
Well, you know, Jay, it's funny. You've been part of the Trade Association Institute of Scrap Recycling. That's where we met. And you do work for Sierra, for full disclosure, your Prestige Economics, your foresight, your ranking in the world is pretty outstanding. So where are you ranked on Bloomberg these days? Tell us your rankings.
Well, right now I'm top ranked in a few different currency categories. They no longer have some of the same commodity rankings for which I've been ranked number one in the world. They don't have those rankings anymore.
Are they tired of you having the spotlight? What's the
Probably. I think it might have been an issue with people changing firms very frequently, and then they lose track of who's where. So
people on the move.
People on the move, which in finance, people tend to change jobs in companies quite often. But I've been doing this for 13 years now.
That all?
Yeah. Well, before this, I was in consulting for a couple of years. Before that, I was in banking. I guess the first time I spoke to ISRI was 2005. So that's been 17 years for
Fantastic.
That.
Well, you know what?
Yeah.
This is fantastic. You know, it segues in about people bouncing around. One of the big issues to all of us in the recycling industry today is the labor market.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us an update? Because this podcast is going to get released this week. So what's going on in the labor market? Is it or is it not tight? What is the real issue? Why aren't people able to find job or find people to work? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things, right? Everyone wants to see the economy firing on all cylinders. The problem is right now the economy is firing on 8 cylinders, but it's only a 6-cylinder economy, right? So we've got essentially more jobs open than there are people, and this is especially true in industries that never shut down, essential industries like scrap metal recycling, manufacturing, and other industries that were deemed critical, right? So all of that stuff's super tight. And against that, we still have a backdrop of very low interest rates and really good economic tailwinds.
So we were talking earlier, and I think this is probably the most fascinating statistic. There's 149 million people in the workplace, yet there's job openings for help me explain this one, because
Yeah, so if you look at the number of jobs posted online, there's a Help Wanted Online index from the Conference Board, and you see there's 16 or 17 million more jobs available implied than there are people currently working in the workforce, right? So we're down a little bit from where we were before COVID, but there's still this monstrous gap of open jobs, a lot more open jobs than there, millions and millions more open jobs than there were before COVID.
So as the recycling industry goes and the manufacturing industry that uses the metals and the paper and the plastic, the electronics that we recycle, how does that translate to their economic world?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think probably the most important thing we learned during the COVID pandemic is that the generational narrative that millennials just want experiences in avocado toast is a mythology. And that the truth is,
I don't like avocado toast.
Well, right,
do you?
but no,
Jay,
no,
you don't look like
I'm
you eat avocado.
I'm not an avocado toast. But the point is that, we've all been to conferences. We've heard people talk about the different generations, and millennials don't want to own stuff. What do you know? When people couldn't go out and consume services, everyone wanted to own stuff. And so this notion that all generations are different, no, every 20-year-old becomes a 40-year-old. And the truth is that right now, obviously some millennials are in their 40s now, right? And so, try that one on for size. And that happened during COVID. And what do you know? People want to buy stuff. And as they bought more stuff, it drove up metals demand. It drove up metals prices. It made scrap metal recycling become even more critical as a supply chain input for manufactured goods. And with super low interest rates, everyone was buying everything, which is why the prices of used vehicles, new vehicles, equipment, durable goods, you name it, all stuff is expensive because everyone was buying everything.
Okay, so in a report that I saw of yours, the Material Handling Institute, is it, or Industries? Industries. They're unfulfilled orders. Now, here at Sierra, and like many of the people I've talked to in the recycling industry, we still have over $500,000 of forklifts that have been on order for over a year now. And we only got 3 out of the 10. What are they telling you?
So there's an economic index that Prestige Economics creates for every month for MHI, the Material Handling Industry Group. It's like the ISRI for material handling.
Right on.
And
they're not as fun as us, though, right?
They are a very fun group.
And got it. I was hoping we were the funnest. But
ISRI is also everybody's a fun group. So,
okay, there you go.
And
very politically correct.
And everyone who's in manufacturing is struggling with what I call scavenger hunt economics, right? You're trying to manufacture stuff. I know you've seen it here at Sierra. You got to manufacture whatever you're making, a baler. You've got to get these parts and those parts and this metal. And then, what if this one piece is missing? Now it all goes into unfilled orders. And that's what happened in material handling. They've had record levels of unfilled orders. Inventories then go up. Stuff is stuck in WIP because you're trying to get all the stuff you need. And then you're also hoping you have all the people to make all the stuff.
Well, I could tell you for manufacturing of balers, the biggest issue we have with balers and shears right now are the electronic components. You can have $1 million piece of equipment, and this for any piece of equipment, and you need the electronics run it. But if you don't have that little $50 fuse box, that $1 million piece of equipment doesn't run. So what are they saying is the biggest shortages? Or do you know? What's the hardest components to come by?
Yeah, so for most manufacturers I talk to, and I do work in the material handling industry, I do work for other industry groups as well, they're all struggling with everything. And it's sort of a little kids soccer team of shortages, right? So, that all of a sudden over here, oh no, we can't get steel at any price. Oh, steel's opening up a little bit. Oh no, now we need whatever, right? Now we need electronics. Oh no, now we've got it all, but we don't have any people because the labor market, now let's quick hire more people. And you run around on this merry-go-round.
Well, that's true. I mean, from our experience, okay, Sierra, look, we're manufacturers of equipment. But we run a recycling operation. So some of the goods we're trying to buy, we just can't get. And we hear the supply chain. And as a manufacturer, there's truth.
Yeah. And what's really happened here is the price of money everywhere has gone to super dirt cheap levels we've never seen. The Fed, other central banks were buying debt of various kinds to depress interest rates even further. And then most governments spent all kinds of money they didn't have and engaged in deficit spending. And so what happens is you had the cost of money, the cost to borrow plummet, and then you had a huge cash infusion from sovereigns. So countries like the US, right? Stimulus payments and other kinds of things. There were also the PPP loans. All kinds of money comes into the system. So you've got all kinds of money coming in just as interest rates are super low and demand for all physical goods went up. And now you've got supply chain bottlenecks and orders that are out 6, 12, 24 months.
Yeah. So, I hear this from people, regular consumers of everyday products. Rising prices are due because big business can raise the price. And I tell them, look, consumer or the manufacturer's price index or producer's price index, it's 15% inflation. Things are costing more, so you have to raise your prices. But what do you say to those who say, well, people are just raising the prices because they can, they're gouging the consumer? What's real and what's not real there?
Yes, there's a couple pieces here. That PPI index, the producer price index, includes producer inflation costs for both services and manufactured goods. That 15% year on year is the December 2021 year on year rate for manufactured goods only. So that's a really good proxy for what, again, all industries, anything manufactured, that's what that finished PPI number is. So that's a big number, but that excludes inflation in services is typically less, and not all manufacturing takes place in the same place, has the same pressures, but in aggregate, that's that 15% number. The big takeaway, though, and what you're talking about is sort of this business strategy, right? Which is no one wants to be the CEO of a company that has the biggest year of new orders ever and doesn't turn a profit, right? You know, because the goal of business is, don't tell anybody, this is super secret. Buy low, sell high, make money, right? And you want to make a spread.
I think that's the first thing I learned in the metal recycling business.
Shh, don't tell anyone. Big secret.
Yeah.
I think there's folks who don't get it.
Yeah.
So the point is, right, you want to have that spread. The problem is some companies, because of the inflationary pressures, they've had their biggest years of orders ever, but costs have gone up faster than prices, which means, you know, this is like that old joke, right? A guy sells a car. Every car he sells, he loses $500. Somebody goes over and says, how do you have a business? He goes, I make it up on volume. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the truth is you have to make a profit on those items. Now, balance that risk, that need to make a profit against what happens if you raise your prices too fast. You raise your prices too fast, your competitors are going to come along and eat your market share.
Sure.
So you have to balance that. So the question of, is everybody just, raising prices to whatever? Companies are trying to remain profitable in a rapidly elevated inflation environment, and they can only raise it so fast so that they don't lose market share.
Yeah, and there's always there's resistance to price increases. So this leads into inflation, interest rates discussion. Okay, are we in hyperinflation, and how much are the Feds going to raise the rate? 50 basis points, more or less? I mean, at what point do they scare the hell out of equities and all of a sudden things come tumbling down if they go too high, or if they don't do enough and we suffer hyperinflation? Where are we on all this?
So we're not at hyperinflation. 7.5%, which is a year-on-year total CPI number. That is not hyperinflation. That's the January 2022 number, year-on-year, 7.5%. So that's a lot of inflation compared to the U.S. because the Fed's target before COVID was 2. And the long-term target of the Fed is 2. 7.5 is multiples of that, right? But hyperinflation is kind of when it's out of control, and that's what the Fed wants to prevent, right? It's not 7, then it goes from 7.5 to 10 to 15 to 300%, 800%, 10,000%, right? And the next thing you know, we're printing, $100 trillion bills, right? So that's hyperinflation. But the Fed doesn't even want it to be really where it is now. And they're going to be raising interest rates probably beginning in the next March meeting of the Fed, which is on March 16th.
How much? Your guess? I know your guess is good as anyone.
Probably, the markets are currently beginning to price in a 50 basis point increase, which is super aggressive. But even right now, as we're sitting here on Valentine's Day, spending our Valentine's Day with the folks here, pile of scrap, sharing the love, and as we're here
Boy, are we
that,
the most romantic? Our wives just love us. Do your podcast on whenever you want.
That's it. Bromantic podcast.
Yeah, there you
go. It's our love for scrap that brings us here. There it is. So, the truth is that as we're sitting here, the Fed right now is still expanding its balance sheet. The Fed is pulling money essentially out of the sky, saying it just has more, and it's buying mortgages and treasuries to depress those interest rates. So even right this very second, as we're talking about 50 basis point rate hikes a month from now, the Fed is still engaging in actions where its balance sheet is getting bigger and it's spending money that it previously did not have to buy mortgages and treasuries to keep interest rates low. So this is really crazy. But if the Fed they didn't want to move too fast. If they move too fast, that's when you get massive market corrections. Fed doesn't want to do that either.
So you feel the market's been priced, they're pricing in as we speak, the 50% basis hike. That wouldn't surprise you if they did that.
Yeah. That would mean the interest
okay, so
rate-
they're raising interest rates to slow down inflation, to kind of cool things off. What's the net effect on business what's going to happen?
Yeah, so that
What's the real thing going to happen?
Yeah, so right now the interest rate, the baseline interest rate that the Fed sets, all other interest rates are kind of based off that. So the Fed rate right now, it's between 0 and 0.25%. If they raise it 50 basis points, then the interest rate would be 0.5 to 0.75%. They're probably going to do a lot more rate hikes than just one, but they're not going to do it so quickly that it reverses the wealth effect. So here's the big secret about the American economy. Over 70% of the U.S. economy is consumption, people buying stuff. When do people buy stuff? When they feel wealthy. Well, this is a thing called the wealth effect. When do people feel wealthy? When their home prices go up, when the stock market goes up. That's happened a lot in the last couple of years. People feel pretty good. They're out there spending. What the Fed doesn't want to do is raise rates so much that people then, those prices go down, people feel less wealthy, and then you end up with a cycle where, now I'm scared, now I'm going to spend less, and then
let's talk about personal
fast.
spending. People who use a lot of credit cards, and there's the higher the credit card debt is up, right?
All debt, overall consumer debt in the U.S. is up. But as a percent of GDP, it's much lower than when it was before the financial crisis.
That's interesting. Okay, but so they raise rates. What are credit card rates going to do then?
They'll all go up, but a credit card rate. Look, if the Fed raises rates 0.5%, your 26% rate interest on your credit card might go up to 26.5%.
Okay.
Right? So there's kind of a marginal difference. The area where it's most important is probably not with credit cards because the rates are already so high. It's in mortgages. It's what happens in the housing market. Because if you get the Fed moves, okay, so they do 50 basis points, then they do another 50, then they do another 50, or they do a 50 and then a bunch of 25s. Who knows, right? But by the end of the year, maybe we're at 100 basis points, maybe we're at 175 basis points.
So mortgage rates go from what to what?
Oh, they could go from like 3.25%, 3.5% to 4.5% to 5%.
At what level do mortgage rate? At what interest level on mortgage rates really start stifling new growth in the housing market and in that industry? At what level do you think people go, well, I can't afford that?
So in every recession in U.S. history, except for the recession of 07-09, when interest rates went down, housing starts went up, housing demand went up. The reason is the cost of money goes down and the demand is there, right? Now, 07-09, that didn't happen because that was a crisis caused in large part due to the housing crisis. What's happened, though, since 09 is that there hasn't been enough housing built. That even now, even after the COVID recession, housing starts are not near where they were. They're still lower than where they were.
Why?
Before 07. Tight credit. If you look at the mortgages that have been issued, something like 2/3 of mortgages in recent quarters have been issued to people with 760 credit scores or better.
Those are the good people.
That's 2/3 of recent mortgages.
So now, didn't we get into the housing bubble based on the fact we were lending money to anybody regardless of their credit score?
Right.
You didn't even have to put money down.
Right. So I think before the housing crisis, it might have been around 40% of mortgages that were going to people with the 760 plus credit score. So in other words, we have a higher percentage right now of people with those higher credit scores. That's a good sign for housing. What's also a good sign for that market in general is right now there's really high demand. There's undersupply. There's tight inventory in Bakersfield.
Right.
There's tight inventory in Austin. There's tight inventory in a lot of places. And yet we talked about the labor market. Labor market's hot right now. A lot of people have jobs. People are making more money than they've ever made before. And so they might still be buying even as interest rates go up. But what happens is as people buy houses, they have to make a trade-off between how much they're putting towards the interest payment, how much they're putting towards the actual house, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. This is what people talk about of how much house can you afford? Because mortgages are usually approved based on your monthly payment relative to your income and your debt.
So all of this leads into the great, how does this affect the metals market for in our recycling industry? Yep. We always want to see our commodity prices hot. Copper and aluminum right now are in incredible ranges. New steel has been very high as a manufacturer. Plate prices, are ridiculous compared to what they were a year ago. But you're forecasting something a little different. Tell us about what you're seeing in the metals commodities sector.
Sure. So I think the outlook is in two parts, the non-ferrous and the ferrous. On the ferrous side, I think we're going to probably see some more downward pressure than we see on the non-ferrous side. Non-ferrous is likely to remain quite strong. Inventories for some metals, you look at the LME inventories for aluminum, very, very tight. You look at the expected demand from electric vehicles and other policy-driven net zero emission goals. There's not enough of metals like nickel, copper, lithium, cobalt, vanadium. Many metals in the non-ferrous side are just not in the abundance required to meet those future needs, which is very price supportive. On the ferrous side, there's a little more downside. There is more supply, and those aren't really tied to that.
Why is there more supply of iron in the ferrous side for recycling versus the non-ferrous? I mean, aren't things being built? I mean, isn't there still $1 trillion that the government has approved? And when people want to buy "quote unquote" stuff, stuff needs new infrastructure build. We still need highway. Still need a lot of steel to do this.
Oh yeah. So what I'm talking about is the amount of supply literally on planet Earth.
Okay,
right? There's more
between iron ore and,
right. Like if we compare iron ore to copper, if we compare, that to nickel or lead or zinc, or right. That's what we're talking about when we say that. But in terms of the flows, there's a lot more ferrous that also flows through the recycling world.
Okay.
Than we see than a specific non-ferrous metal.
Well, so 2022, a lot of people who sell equipment are almost sold out this year. Sierra being one of them. Try buying a material handler. Try buying a Peterbilt truck. Try buying a Kenworth truck. Forklifts we talked about for it. You're not going to be able to get it. 2022 going to be a good year. 2023. When you're already talking sales into, here we are early February, Valentine's Day, halfway through February, and we're talking sales into 2023 on multiple commodities, consumer products. What's your forecast?
Yeah, so this year, a lot of the growth is baked in because we've got demand, new orders, manufactured goods, things already booked. This year should be a good year. Growth rate might not be as strong as in 2021, but there was a lot more stimulus last year. Interest rates lower last year than they'll be this year. This should still be a good year for growth in the U.S. 2023 is going to be slower. In 2024, second half of 2023 and into 2024, there's more risks.
Because, well, hold on. You say slower, but what's still a good economy, even in a slower rate of GDP growth? What's still considered a good economy?
In the U.S., I would think between that 1.5% and 2.5% GDP that's where we spent most of the last business cycle. Those are okay years. 1.5 feels less okay than 2.5, right? But
what are you forecasting 2023?
For 2023, we're probably going to see that growth range be closer to the 2.5 number.
Okay. So we're still going to see good economic times.
We should see good economic times, but the Fed could mess it up, right? And the Fed could raise rates a little too quickly.
Leave it to the government.
Well, it's the thing is this interest rate thing, it's a moving target. And if they go a little too fast, things slow a little more quickly, and then we're at 1.5. Or less.
All right. So as an economist, as a person who's, this industry is near and dear to your heart.
Yep.
And you look at what the feds could do, should do, or will do. What percentage likelihood do you give them screwing it up? 50-50, 60-40? We're dealing with people who don't make payroll.
Right. So for the central bankers on the Federal Reserve who make the decisions about interest rates on a 1-year time horizon, like, do they mess it up this year? I'd say there's an 80% chance that they don't mess it up in 2022.
Okay.
I'd say there's a 60% chance they don't mess it up by 2023.
Okay, well, that's better than 50-50.
And there's probably a 30% chance they don't mess it up by 2024, right? So you could see the risk profile changes because they might be cutting interest rates by the second half of 2023 or into 2024. You might recall before we had COVID, manufacturing had actually slumped in the second half of 2019 because the Fed had raised rates too quickly and was reducing the size of its balance sheet, and they had to quickly reverse course. They were cutting rates before COVID happened, not because they had any inclination or any inkling that COVID was going to happen. It was simply that growth had slowed too much. They had gone too far. So I do think we're going to see them maybe reverse course more quickly than we have in the past.
Well, the biggest wild card right now for all of us who are brave enough to turn on the evening news is Cold War II. I mean, the reality is this current administration is saying be prepared that Russia's going to invade Ukraine, and then you get one side saying this and that. Then there's China and Taiwan. I mean, man, if those events happen, what happens to our economy? Does it just crater completely? I mean, what's the likelihood of some of it happening? Does it happen? And what does it do to our economy?
So there are two parts to the Cold War II thing that we've been talking about for some time. The first part's what's going on in Europe, and the second part's what's going on in Asia. Let's handle maybe the European part.
Let's go to Europe.
It is a very quickly evolving situation. Just a few days ago, as you know, State Department came out, said, look, if you got to get out. President Biden said, look, we're not going to, if you don't get out of Ukraine and there's a war, we're not sending troops in to come rescue you. You should get out now, right? We've heard that now from the National Security Advisor. We've heard it from the Secretary of State. We've heard it from the President, right? That's a real risk that could go sideways. And it could go sideways even before this podcast gets posted. And by sideways, I mean that could turn into armed conflict.
Yeah, it's only going to take a couple of days to get this edited and out. So all right, let's talk about that for a second.
So what happens, right? So this is a greatest downside risk to European growth, right? Because this would be the first major European armed conflict since the Second World War. So this would be of a multinational sort, right? And I realize there were conflicts in Yugoslavia, but that was part of the balkanization, the breakup of the country. So compared to bad things that could happen, this is pretty high on the list for Europe. That could drive up things like European natural gas prices, European power prices, global LNG prices. Because Russia is a critical supplier of natural gas into Western Europe, and that's part of the Western European Sustainability Initiative, the move away from coal, the move away from nuclear in Germany, for example. It's all reliant on Russian natural gas. So there's all kinds of complicated relationship aspects of that. The other thing it could do, it could support the dollar as a flight to liquidity. It could also support gold prices. For industrial metals, it could be mixed to bearish as it could be for equities. And it'll just kind of depend on how bad things are, how quickly things play out. But it's not a great scenario, especially in a rising interest rate environment. It just piles on some extra risk.
But here in America, do Americans really fear this, the Ukraine-Russia war? Do you feel that the John Q. public, they're going to brush it off out of hell with them, they're too far away? Or do they feel this is going to spill over to their everyday lives, to a whole full-blown conflict that enters into World War III?
Yeah, so I'm not predicting World War III. I've been predicting Cold War II for some time, and this certainly begins to look like it. What I would say is if we think about Ukraine and the risks, and what does it mean to the U.S., we could look at what does it mean to the U.S. and NATO, because the U.S. and NATO have both come out and said, and of course the U.S. is a member of NATO, but Ukraine has since 2020 has been a partner country of NATO, right? And one of the big sticking points is Russia doesn't want Ukraine joining NATO, right? Traditionally, in its sphere of influence, it's on its border, it does not want to see Ukraine join NATO, right? So that's a really big sticking point. But both NATO and the US have come out and said, Here's going to be our response. Political and economic sanctions of Russia. We're going to send support and material to Ukraine, and we're going to send more troops to NATO countries that border Russia and Ukraine. There is no discussion of sending U.S. troops into Ukraine. And in a recent survey, Morning Consult did a survey of 2005 U.S. registered voters in the first week of February, and only 34% of American voters of those American voters they surveyed, could find Ukraine on a map. So I don't think for the U.S., for John Q. Public in the U.S., this is a big deal. In Europe, it could be a much bigger deal.
So this could send oil prices higher.
Could send oil prices higher.
And that could stifle economic growth as well.
Could add some inflationary pressure. Yeah, it could make nat gas prices even reverberate, right, globally, most specifically in Europe, more inflation, which would mean the ECB might need to raise rates more quickly than they otherwise would. European nat gas power goes up, global LNG goes up, even U.S. domestic nat gas prices could go up. So you get all these weird ripples, many of which seem inflationary. And then you've also got this fear factor of growth, which could weigh on European equity markets, and then that could ripple around the world globally, right?
So people aren't going to feel as rich because the stock market's going back down again.
Right, and then it could slow consumption, and it threatens a European recession or something like this.
You say European recession.
Yep.
Why not a U.S. recession?
The U.S. economy is more removed, right? Ukraine is far away, right?
Okay, and so that distance is what's...
proximity matters a lot when we're talking large-scale wars.
Got it. Well, no, that makes a lot of sense. But see, I think it's clear in our discussions, and what you're saying is, even if something happens, the net effect may not be that dramatic to where we are here in the U.S. as far as our economic world goes.
I think that's right. I do think, again, equity markets can ripple, right? We've seen it many times. Europe equity markets goes down for some reason. The U.S. opens and the U.S. is down because Europe's down. Then Asia opens and it's down because the U.S. is down. And then when Europe opens again, because Asia was down, now it's down more. So you can end up with these kinds of equity market spirals. But at the end of the day, in the U.S., we have a stronger economy than in Europe. It is less threatened than
All right.
European
So
economies.
this goes down, Ukraine. Politicians are going to be clamoring for a stronger U.S. Military. Does that help the metals in our industry? From our industrial standpoint, does increasing the defense budget and building more tanks and jeeps and missiles and et cetera, actually move the needle to commodity prices in the metal world?
I don't think it will, because I'm not sure how much more additional defense spending it could lead to. The truth is, because of the failures the U.S. military experienced in Iraq and most recently in Afghanistan, there might be very little appetite on the part of the U.S. public to get more involved militarily in a place that, again, 66% of voters can't find on a map, right? And getting into another conflict like that might not be something we want to do. And again, the president has not said or indicated that, and has said quite the opposite. We're not sending troops in if this goes bad. So essentially, what the NATO position is, what's in NATO is on this side of the wall, and we will defend with troops. What's not in NATO is on the other side of that new Iron Curtain, and we'll send some stuff, right? The Germans sent 5,000 helmets to Ukraine, and the mayor of Kiev said, "Great, are you sending pillows next?" Right? So, right, like this is harsh, right? So this is a question of how much support is Ukraine going to get from these different countries, and different countries will lend different levels of support. The real question becomes whether the Baltics become threatened, because the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania aren't in NATO, and they also border Russia, or if Poland were to become threatened, or if Romania becomes threatened, right? So there are a number of countries in NATO that have more proximity to Russia. Those are the places we're going to send troops to send the message that what's on this side of this new Iron Curtain in Cold War II is hands off.
All right. So that's, look, it's a big topic. You can't turn on the news today and not see it. And, this podcast, we're talking about economics with you, Jason. How does this affect the recycling industry? be it our government with laws and regulations, but now we're getting into geopolitical conflicts that can affect our industry.
Yeah, that's right. And it really does affect the industry in so much as it could slow growth. It could interrupt trade flows, right? If you've got steel or ferrous scrap, any kind of metals, you're moving into Europe, out of Europe, even if you were sending things in or out of Turkey, right? If you're moving stuff around and now suddenly there's a large armed conflict in Europe, that could make your supply chain even messier at a time when everyone has seen very messy supply chains. So
let's talk about
up.
that real quick. Los Angeles, Long Beach.
Yep.
The ships that are offshore waiting to be offloaded. The truth is, and they don't tell us this, the fact is that the Port of Long Beach has actually taken in, offloaded, and onboarded more goods than they ever have. And yet there's a backlog because they can't handle this 20, 30% increase of usage need, right?
So, yeah. So the problem is it's exactly this. The system is doing more than it's ever done, but it's just not enough, right? This is we're going on all 8 cylinders. Too bad it's a 6-cylinder port, right? And it's doing more than it's ever done before. But just like you said, there's this just surplus of activity above and beyond what the supply chain can handle. And that's going on everywhere. On-road freight, waterborne freight, ports. It's everywhere throughout every supply chain.
There's no way to find a quick solution to any of this because none of it gets done overnight. And it takes decades, shovel-ready jobs. Remember that?
Yep.
Famous quote?
Yep.
We didn't see anything.
Well,
so how do you increase the capacity of a port? How do you increase the capacity of your highways and railways? Hell, we can't even get high-speed rail from Bakersfield to Sacramento because some kangaroo rat's in the damn way, So you just can't do anything quickly anymore.
Well, there are a couple things here. This is actually a topic that a few of the people that contribute annually to, we produce a book called the Robot Automation Almanac. And in 2022, we had a number of different supply chain experts contribute about what we were going to see in the year ahead. One of the solutions is you need a lot more automation in the supply chain. We do. But the other issue is there really are a limited number of ports. It takes forever to get a new port built or to expand a port, right? These are big infrastructure projects. And what we're seeing right now, this still gets back to the fundamental thing we talked about with the economy. Interest rates have been super low and governments everywhere infuse the world with extra money. So everyone's got money. The interest rate of money is super cheap everywhere. Everyone's buying everything. And until that slows down, the ports are going to be honeycombed, filled with more stuff than they can even move around.
More stuff than we need, probably. I don't know.
Well, not more than we're demanding. And again, that's a function of the low rates and all the money and the buy it all.
So we were talking earlier when I picked you up driving in here to Sierra about you're an economist and you see the good and you see the potential for bad and you see all this stuff and you help your clients, try to navigate the economic world. But you got to go home every night.
Yep.
And you learn all this stuff. And everybody who doesn't want to take work home, but you still know stuff that scares the hell out of you. How do you, shut that off when you know stuff because you work for some people and you can't talk about it?
There are different things that keep me up at night and there are things that don't, right? The economy, the vacillations, the vicissitudes of different economic cycles is less worrisome to me than sort of Cold War II risks or where we see different things going on domestically with a self-balkanization of subjectivist political reality and identity that leads to infighting and the potential for external parties to contribute to the subversion of our democracy. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. And, the worrying thought I had about this, and I've done some DoD work, and I said this recently to one of my contacts, and I've done quite a bit of DoD work since 2017. And I said, look, no country is forever. And if there's anything I can do to help push this boat row in the right direction just a little bit to keep the American experiment going just a little bit longer, let me know. And that's the fundamental reality of it. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to be able to sleep by hearing that. I'm already a light sleeper now. No countries forever. Well, geez.
Well, I mean, but it's true,
Well,
right?
the Roman Empire, I think that's just a classic example of get too big and you crater. And, did the U.S. get too big and are we cratering? Are we in the early stages of cratering? I would like to think not. I'd like to think that there's a lot, I don't think in the near future, 10, 20 years, we're going to see this, but, another 50, 100 years, I think I'm glad I'm not going to be around to see it.
Well, I hope you're around to see it. Whatever happens,
that would put me at 110. At that point, who knows? Who the hell knows what I would care about then? Just give me a glass of wine. I'd be happy, right?
I guess that's true. I think the thing that's really interesting is if we look, we all tend to think that the current state of existence is reality. And the truth is that since the end of the Second World War, we've had one of the longest periods of peace in history, and including, right, even with the Cold War, even with Vietnam and Korea and other conflicts we've had, there have been a lot fewer conflicts than at any time in history. Look at Europe. How many wars were there fought over hundreds and hundreds of years? It's been pretty quiet, right?
It's been real quiet over there.
It's been real quiet.
So the Europeans better start getting nervous then, I think. It's
so
been quiet a little too long, huh?
Well, I mean, the truth is we've been lucky that these post-war institutions really have helped to keep the peace. The question is, how do things shift if we see Russia and China looking to expand their reach? How do we respond? How does that either contribute to or hinder additional conflicts? Those are things that are all moving pieces. And we don't have as much money and leverage as we had at the end of the Second World War, at the beginning of the First Cold War. We have $30 trillion in debt now. It's a lot tougher to
all right, this will be our last subject to talk on, because Elon Musk just the other day is talking about, hello, people, wake up. This is a problem. It seems like nobody cares. Nobody gives a crap about how much money the government spends and how much debt we have. Oh, our children and our grandchildren. I'm tired of the politicians saying that crap. Let's get right down to it. When will it start to matter?
Wow, you want the easy answer. So, on the one hand, there's no such thing as
there's no such thing. Easy answer.
No.
There's a certain point. There's something's got to give.
Well,
or maybe never.
Right. So the reality is, as long as we grow faster than the debt as an economy, it's okay. The problem is our interest rates are super low right now. We talked about that, that's 0 to 0.25%. As the Fed raises rates and other interest rates go up, we now have $30 trillion of debt. It took 205 years to get to $1 trillion in national debt. And in 2020, we added over $1 trillion in every month of the second quarter. Now, that kept the economy going, and it would have been a lot worse if we hadn't done it. But now that interest rates are going up, we have a lot of debt to refinance. Was it worth it? I would argue the U.S. is in a much better position than emerging markets, because look at how much wealth was created in the stock market in the last 2 years. Look at how much wealth was created in real estate of every kind, company valuations in the last 2 years. Everything is worth more, a lot more. That's not true in emerging markets and low-income developing economies. Those economies will see their interest rates rise. They'll see them rise faster than ours, and they didn't have the same wealth creation.
And which one of those markets and what areas or what have you will affect, become a drag on our economy?
Well, there are risks in the next sort of 12 to 24 months that we could see a large emerging market sovereign debt crisis. That would mean that countries, and which countries it is, it's not quite clear. But what we know is if the Fed's raising rates, our rates go up a little bit. What's going to happen in emerging markets that already have a higher interest rate? Fed goes up a little here. Those emerging market rates will probably go up quite a lot. It's called a credit spread because it's the spread between their interest rate and ours. Ours goes up a little. Their spread might widen and go up quite a lot. As that happens, we could see economies in developing Asia, Africa, South America, they could have trouble paying their debts. If that happens, now you could have a global credit crisis. And the sovereign debt market's a very big one. If that happens, credit everywhere could get repriced. That could present systemic risks to financial markets and financial systems. And that's a not small risk over the next 24 months.
Okay, so now I won't be sleeping for the next week, 2 weeks.
Well,
and I want to thank you for that. All right, let's talk.
Wait, allow me to make it worse.
Oh, so please,
but wait, there's more. Yeah, right. So,
all right, Joe Ronco, let's go.
No, but that's it. The truth is that something like 70% of emerging market debt is currently held by China. So if we think about those Cold War II dynamics, U.S. is in debt. We're 30 trillion plus in debt. We don't have the reach we used to have from a manufacturing standpoint, from a global power standpoint. We don't have the finances or the ability to project our influence economically the way we did at the end of the Second World War. Whereas China currently holds 70% of the debt of emerging markets. That gives them a lot of influence to project soft power. So that's another risk in the Cold War II dynamic of how we're actually already on weak footing. These credit dynamics and what ties into inflation and the Fed, how does that all tie into what could happen with China or Ukraine? All that's mixed in the same pot.
Yeah, but if you have a bunch of account receivables and you don't collect, putting an air base in the middle of South America, yeah.
Well, so this is the point, right?
You got to spend more money. So they don't pay their. I've never seen whatever happened to a country that doesn't pay their debt.
Well, there are a number of different countries that didn't pay their debts to us. There are a number of different countries. This is sort of what the IMF and the World Bank were designed to do. The multilateral institutions created at Bretton Woods at the end of the Second World War, just before the end of the Second World War, to help prevent a giant credit crisis. Because what happened that triggered, if you look at the world wars and what happened, what really a critical contributing factor to the Second World War was the Great Depression. And what caused that was a lack of transparency around debt and debt obligations in Germany. And then in the US, you have runs on the banks and the debt, and debt gets called from Germany, and now it just ripples in the whole thing, right? That creates the economic chaos everywhere. Now, the IMF and the World Bank help economies and countries that have debt refinance that debt so it doesn't lead to a crisis. But many of those countries are not being transparent with the IMF and the World Bank. This is actually going on right now. I'm a member of the Bretton Woods Committee. This is a major issue. Countries that owe money to China don't want to disclose the terms. China also doesn't want to disclose the terms of the money that it's lent to some emerging markets. Without that transparency, you can't help them refinance their debt. And if they revealed the actual terms, it might make their cost of credit go up even more. That being said, while some economies might try to default on their debt, I don't know how well that's going to go for them if they try to default on their debt to China.
Well, we'll come in and take over. Who knows? All right, so what? So what? Meaning, it's all unknown, Jay. How about we finish here on something good?
Okay.
Let's. All right. Well, we'll have to sit and pause here for the next hour to figure out.
No, I don't mean to be. Look, sometimes I give speeches. There are some groups I know that have known me for a long time, about as long as Israel, and they refer to me as Mr. Happy because sometimes when I give a speech, what I'm saying is so unhappy. But look, the good news is we do have strong economic tailwinds, and manufacturing growth are pretty good. And for now, interest rates are low. There are these big things kind of looming out there, and they're quite intricate, complicated, and becoming more of a systemic risk. And so just keeping an eye on them is probably the right approach. For the scrap industry to bring it all back home, right now things are pretty good. And I think they probably will be for the next year.
So speculating right now is not really a solid idea.
It depends what you're speculating on. But, I think this is a time to be wary of those longer-term, larger risks that are rising because they're out there. I mean, we've just come off the biggest boom really the country's had in a very long time, which is part of the reason the inflation rate is the highest it's been since early 1982, right? Our GDP rate in the fourth quarter it was, I want to say, the highest since 1984, or the whole year. The whole year's economic growth, I want to say for last year, both nominal and real GDP for 2021, was the highest growth rate since 1984. We haven't seen this kind of growth in a long time, and growth rates are going to slow. But there are these other things brewing just to keep an eye on.
Well, I think that's true. My dad had a saying in Italian, "Il occhio del padrone fa ingrasso il cavallo," which means the eyes of the owner make the horse fat, which translate, just keep an eye on things. Because
that's right.
And I think ultimately that's what we have to do. The recycling industry, it's been around forever because people are pretty doggone sharp about keeping the eye on things. And I think we're going to have a good year. Coming to Vegas for ISRI?
I'll be there.
Can you imagine people getting together again?
I'm looking forward to it.
So am I.
I think it's going to be a good time, and we can do another podcast and talk about.
Well, we're doing a live podcast from the booth at Sierra during the convention, and it's my hope to get a lot of my friends and people who we know to get on, give me a few minutes of hello and a little conversation, because ultimately conversation and knowledge is shared by a lot of people. I think it makes us all better, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We can talk about less contentious issues like the midterm elections coming up.
And we didn't even hit on that. All right, we will.
Got to save something for next time, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Got to leave them wanting more.
I mean, I guess
another optimistic discussion. I'm sure it'll be calm and peaceful and just.
Oh, can you imagine your political party? Oh man, yeah, that'll be good. If you're on the left or you're on the right. Oh my goodness. Let's just stay away from politics, from elections right now.
Time. Yeah.
Big J, thank you, buddy. Appreciate you coming here today and sitting down with us. And that's it for another episode of
Pile of Scrap.
Yeah, you got it.
This has been a Sierra International Machinery original audio series. Thanks for listening. Please share this podcast and make sure to subscribe.